Hey folks, it's not actually the time I set, but Joanne and I are just back here chatting, so we are like, we might as well chat live. And in fact, we were just comparing our mugs, and I was saying that mine is really pretty, and she was saying that hers, however,
so it is Mark Twain, but that wasn't the part I was excited about. On the back, and I'll show you in a minute, it says, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes," and it's from Mark Twain, The Gilded Age, which just seems appropriate.
Yes, except I have to point out that The Gilded Age came out in 1873, not 1874.
Heather has corrected my mug.
It was co-written by Charles Dudley Warner. And I expected it was going to be brilliant the first time I read it. And
I have not read it. And this was a gift. So I am going to say, if the person who gave me this gift watches my podcast and sent it, 1874 is okay by me.
Actually, it's a really interesting book because and honestly worth revisiting now, because although we think of it in terms of the late 19th century Gilded Age, which was all about the giant mansions and the gilding and all that kind of stuff, what it's really about is corruption. It's a very tightly written, tightly focused on the corruption of Congress and how that fits into that world, which is, sort of fitting as well. But
it is. I don't even think you can separate the corruption from the Gilded Age in that sense. But yeah, no, you're right.
So anyway, on that cheery note, we both had things we wanted to talk about today, and it turned out they were the same thing. So yeah, and then did we talk this week? I don't think we talked this week, did we?
I don't think so.
I guess we messaged back and forth. The election.
My, oh my, oh my.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Lions and tigers and bears.
Oh, that's true. Oh my. That was not what I expected.
What did you expect?
I didn't expect that extreme a statement. I thought, given everything that we see around us all the time coming out from the Trump administration, I thought, and certainly on a certain level hoped, but thought that there would be a blue pushback. And I was looking for the blue pushback. And I thought it would be an assertive one. And I thought different particular kinds of people would do the pushing. And we saw some of that. But the degree to which, and you put a quote in one of your letters from, was it a political theorist who said everything, Dungeons and Dragons master, 2 Republican Uber drivers. It was great. It was great. And that's what it felt like. And that was what I did not expect, was the sweeping nature of it. And what was to me really obvious messages of it.
So what about that? Because I think you and I have the same take on it.
Right. So my sort of visceral response was the next day when I saw on maybe Blue Sky, I don't know, some form of social media, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries both say the Republican Party is back. And without a moment...
Democratic Party.
Pardon?
You said Republican. Democratic.
Yeah, no, that's not what I meant to say. The Democratic, yikes, edit. The Democratic Party is back. The Democratic Party is back. And my immediate response to that was, this had nothing to do with the Democratic Party.
All right, so what did it have to do with?
I think it had to do with Democratic voters. I think it had to do with candidates focusing in a local way on their constituents and their constituents responding. So I think it was partly responding to candidates who were plugged in to the people who they were representing, and of course, pushing back against the Trump administration. But the party, there wasn't party organization. There wasn't like party leadership per se. There wasn't one face of the party, right? So we got moderate Democrats, we got more extreme Democrats, we got all kinds of Democrats. We got diversity in every sense of the word, right? And that wasn't about a party. That was not about in the sense that we think of political parties.
So, You know what I think really made a huge difference was just the grassroots stuff that people are doing.
Yeah.
This is and I wouldn't even say it's big D Democratic at all. I would we know actually from some of the studies that have come out since the election that Republicans crossed the aisle, and so did MAGA Republicans cross the aisle in at least places in Pennsylvania, and so to me, the thing that I was surprised that people weren't talking about was the change in the media, because really we have had a dramatic upsurge in independent media in really since 2024. I mean, it was there before, but it really took off after 2024, and which is really dealing with the nitty gritty of what's happening in Congress in a way that reminds me very much of the populists in the late 19th century, where all of a sudden there's this rise of all these newspapers in the Great Plains and in the South saying, hey, do you really understand how tariffs work? And the other piece of that I'm always shocked that gets so little play on sort of in the way we talk about politics in the country at large is the grassroots organizing, which is freaking huge. And you see the idea of organizing, and people are looking, as you say, for the things with labels on them.
Right.
But how many book groups have you talked to, and how many little organizations or organizations that aren't hitting the radar screen, but those are all committed people to changing our politics.
So that's the thing, and we've talked about this before, right? That the big name, big national things are what people look for, and it's harder to see the smaller scale things and the more local things. But something that struck me post-election, I in my public commentary since the last No Kings protest, all kinds of people were saying, and I think we talked about this before, big deal. A bunch of people got out on the street, marched around. You're not doing anything. How nice for you that you had a parade. And my response to that, and the election is a nice example of that, along the lines of what you're saying, Heather, is how do you rev up a movement? How do you get people to understand something's happening and get them out? So that may have been, in some sense, a national push, but that was a local thing. There were like little protests all over the place. So along the lines of what you're saying, that kind of thing can matter enormously. And what you're saying here is another great example of that, is that but it was also the candidates looking at their constituents, and there was a give and take of a sort that is small d democracy.
That's right. So now the next piece of that fascinates me is the degree to which, since Tuesday, President Donald Trump and the Republicans have absolutely doubled down on, I'm sorry, and I won't say the word itself here, but I think you can guess which 4-letter word I'm going to go with. F you. Which is a complete, I was trying to think about this morning, as one does, right? What moment in American history does this look like? And I started with the Federalists and, the Hartford Convention, because, they end up completely getting decimated. But I thought not really, because they're trying to represent what was happening in New England in the 18 teens. But then I came up with, does this look like, because to me it really does, what started the American Revolution in the first place? That is the colonists had some complaints about the way things were going, and they sort of said to the Parliament and through them to the king, hey, can we go back to the way things were? I mean, we were pretty okay with the way things were. And the more they say that, the more the king and Parliament say, F you, we're doing it our way. And that keeps ratcheting up until the colonists essentially say, okay, now it's just not about going back to the way it was. Now we're taking a principled stand on these universal values, and that enables them to create a movement that covers, as you say, all these different localities with all these different interests, and pulls them together behind universal values.
But there's two aspects of the dynamics of that I think are important to note, and that also have a play on the present. Number one is that the king, ultimately, part of what fuels that final ability of the colonists to say, you know what, I don't know if we need a king. I don't know if we need to, that's a huge leap for the revolutionaries. And part of what pushes them there is that they keep turning to the king with petitions and lobbyists and a variety of other things. And ultimately, the king says F you to the colonists by not even reading one of their petitions. Right? He doesn't even read it. So the colonists are like, our avenue of engaging in politics has been closed off. Like we're not, so that FU from the person in charge reverberates really powerfully on the part of the colonists.
But you just said something else that jumps out to me too, that basically at some point they say, what do we actually need you for? You're not doing anything we want you to do and that we need you to do. So what do we need you for? And I am truly shocked at the degree to which not just the president, but also the Republicans, and Rosie's shocked too.
Totally.
Not just the president, but the Republicans are saying, yeah, the shutdown, maybe it's going to go on until after Christmas. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? You've got the furloughed federal workers, you have people not having heating assistance and food assistance. You've got the airports, more and more delays. And now they seem to be putting the screws to people traveling over the holidays. And then the cargo planes aren't going to be able to be carrying goods for the biggest retail season of the year. Are they deliberately crashing the country? It sure as hell looks so.
Well, and it's also to me, an indication of something related to what we just said, which is on a certain level, they're not focused on the impact. I mean, they're happy with the impact, but on a certain level, this is about having a leverage in place that they can use against the Democrats. It's about making things horrible so they can blame it on the Democrats. The suffering and the problems and the people not able to buy food and other aspects of the economy and now travel for Thanksgiving, the suffering of people, I think, is secondary. And that's along the lines of how the Republican Party has been in the recent past operating, right? It's about structure and power and what they want. And in a sense, going back to the revolution, that was that moment too, was the king and parliament saying, we gotta keep this structure in place, and when the colonists initially at an early point in the revolution, griped back and said, no, you can't do this. Parliament responded in part by saying, well, we might cave on this issue, but yeah, we can. And we're going to pass an act, the Declaratory Act, just declaring that we can, because this is ultimately about the system and power. And I think that's also a part of the moment that we're in.
So walk us through that a little bit, because one of the things that jumps out right now to me is of the way the Republicans are behaving, where they are refusing to agree to a measure to extend those premium tax credits that 78% of Americans want. I mean, this is a win-win. And you sit there and you say, what's the end game? I mean, to what end are you doing this? And if you put a charitable lens over it, I guess you could say they're saying exactly what you just said about Parliament in the 1770s. We need a structure in which we control things so that we have a certain kind of society. And therefore, you all need to shut up about what you need and just do things our way. Is that right?
Right. It's a form of leverage. What's interesting in the way that you just put it, though, is that you need to shut up and get out of the way because we need a system. This gets back to your talking about the Hartford Convention, right? The Federalists, in the first 10 years of the government, when a big issue is just how democratic is this new country going to be, the Federalists were the folks that were saying, I don't know about all this democracy stuff because the masses are unruly and they're unpredictable, and they should come forward and vote and put who they want in office, and then they should shut up and get out of the way and let us do what we want to do. So that message as well is a fundamental statement from people who are not entirely comfortable with democracy, because you can't unassailably, you can't have power in the way that people who really want power want it, unquestionably, with no challenges under democracy. You can't. Elections are challenges to power. That's their point. And if you think you should be in power forever, you will not be a friend to free and fair elections.
It's interesting that the Federalists say that in the 18 teens, because that is absolutely straight out of the Cotton is King speech in 1858 by James Henry Hammond, the senator from South Carolina, that all democracy means is you choose who you're going to have rule over you, which is obviously not the way the country ended up. But it's an interesting thing. And in this moment, yeah, I find the disconnect between what the country obviously needs and what the Republicans are willing to let it do, despite the obvious thrust of the American people. I just find this disconnect fascinating, because certainly in our lifetimes, and maybe this is all part of the dismantling of the post-World War II liberal consensus. Certainly in our lifetimes, politicians did try to do at least what they thought was good for the American people. And it's a little hard to see how saying, we're just going to keep the government shut down is,
right.
Again, you go back to, what do we need you for?
Right. Well, and you phrased it, what you just said, in an interesting way about the administration and what they want to let us do, which is, precisely the problem, right? That letting us do something, the election just showed that you can't let or not let us do something, right? That election, whatever they thought was going to happen or whatever they tried to do to affect it in one way or another, it didn't work. So what the American people showed in that election is that regardless of what the powers that be are saying should be and how the system should work and how the American people should be, whatever, grateful for what they have, loyal to whatever, the election shows that letting isn't part of this equation. I mean, that, this is the most obvious thing in the world to say, but I think it's important to say, like, that election was like a screaming loud message from the American people about what they want. Think of all of the firsts, like the first Black mayor of Albany, just a string. I tried to make a list, and it was remarkable, the firsts. So on the one hand, Americans were talking about what they wanted, and of course, on the other hand, pushing back really assertively about what they didn't want. And that's how I think you get an interesting coalition that you mentioned earlier about some MAGA people, some Republicans, some Democrats. And that's why it was a blue wave, because there were so many shades of blue that lots of different kinds of people could attune to it. As a matter of fact, I think AOC said this last week. Someone said, what does it say about the face of the Democratic Party? And she said, why does it have to have one face?
Right. Which again harkens back to these moments when we have these broad coalitions to reestablish democracy. But we really can't stop just with the pushback against the election, because House Speaker Mike Johnson has not had the House. I mean, technically it's in session, it's in pro forma sessions, but they haven't done any business since September 19th. September 19th. This has never happened before. He is refusing to seat the representative-elect from Arizona, Adelita Grijalva. In Texas, Governor Greg Abbott is making it very, very difficult for a Democratic-dominated district to replace somebody who died, I think it was a year ago. There's certainly, and Trump's back down in Mar-a-Lago this weekend. They certainly seem essentially to be dismantling the not only popular opinion, but also the pieces of government to enable people to have their voices heard.
Think about a symbolic aspect of this that we talked about, I think, last week, the knocking down of part of the White House, right? That was the most symbolic moment. Like, yeah, we're just going to close down, ignore, the government. And I will add that the founding folk, who were, creating the Constitution, putting the Constitution in place, what they said over and over and over again was part of the importance of the Constitution is that it created a process that could kick into place during times of crisis. The process is what mattered. And what we're seeing is the dismantling or negligence or deliberate spurning of that process. And that process is us. That process is where we get our power from. So I think, us talking about knocking down the East Wing of the White House, that's the most visual representation of some of what we're going through right now. And as you just said, Heather, the disconnect is so extreme that it has to be deliberate. And given how deliberate it is, that's really worth thinking about. What are they actually saying?
Well, but my big thing is I think we got to visualize and work toward the post MAGA country, because, I was reading this morning the speculation, which I don't think is far fetched, that they're perfectly happy with extending this shutdown as far as they can, because a lot of federal workers are simply finding other work because they need a paycheck. And if you look at the decimation, or more than decimation, actually, of the federal government since Trump took power, they're basically getting rid of it the same way that Project 2025 called for, the same way that the extremist Republicans have called for since the New Deal went into place. But the reality is that Americans like the federal government. They like clean water. They like clean air. They like people to have food. They like to get rid of, monopolies and all that.
But
so how do we
realize? They don't always realize that that's what the government gives them, right? Way back years ago, when I was saying, we kind of need the federal government, and people were saying, I don't care about the federal government. It was like, well, do you like good roads? Do you like clean water? Like, do you like, ways in which people don't think the government has anything to do with their life. And what we're going through now, and it's obviously going to keep going and getting worse, is experiencing firsthand the many, many ways in which the federal government does shape everyday lives in everyday ways. And the thing is, if you just want power, like if that is just the goal, that you want power, and if knocking down parts of the government are going to help you have power, and if overturning systems and structures and ignoring the Constitution are going to help you have power, and you really don't fundamentally care about the impact on the American people, why not do it? Why not do it?
Because you kill the goose that laid the golden egg. I mean, and that's when you think about going forward, the Epstein files remain out there, and I maintain that that's huge, not just because of the horrific nature of the crimes committed against children, but also because of the financial crimes. This is, you look at all the stories coming about the money. It was a business. The trafficking was a business.
The thing was, it was trafficking as a business and a structure. So it's not just, this person will be guilty, that person will be guilty. It's bigger than that, and they've proven it by just like not even allowing people who've been elected to Congress to come into Congress out of dead fear that something might happen to expose it.
So we have that out there, but the other piece of this is the extraordinary corruption in general of this administration, and then of course the truly horrific things being done in our name toward undocumented and legal residents and U.S. citizens.
And citizens too.
Yeah. And so you look at all these pieces, and I think it's crucially important to restore our democracy. But part of it is going to be this real fight to get these people out of power. And to do that, this grassroots mobilization, not only for, hey, we'd kind of like to have our navigational buoys back, just saying.
Because I think about navigational buoys all the time.
They matter. Honest to God, they matter a lot in my life.
I'm arguing with you, but yeah.
But in this larger set of principles, which are not just about we would like to go back to the United States Constitution, but the idea that we should not permit a few power-hungry sociopaths to rule over hundreds of millions of people and have our lives, because all of our lives are in their hands, not just the children that are dying because U.S. aid was cut off.
Not just Democrats.
And so I wonder if that's what we're looking at. I think this winter's going to be rough. And I think part of it is going to be continually calling out the corruption and the sociopathy, really, or at least the narcissism and the idea that these guys get to rule over us. But it is also saying, hey, wait a minute here. look at what we just did on Tuesday at the local level. You know, our school boards matter, our local government matters, our state government matters, because by the time these people are done, we're going to have to rebuild that federal government, not necessarily from scratch, but close to it.
Right. But right. And here's the thing. I think often when people think about like what comes next, they're thinking top down. Well, we need to, amend this and create. And I totally agree with you. And I think this should be one of the, if not the most important messages coming out of Tuesday's election, is that it's about us. It's about the American people. That election showed what happens when lots of people in different places with different issues and different leaders with not one big umbrella controlling the message, the power that people can have in a dramatic kind of a way. That should be the message from the election, is the American people can do things when they come together, and whatever happens going forward, that's going to be on us. So that on the one hand can sound scary, but on the other hand, it should sound or feel enlivening and exciting, because what it means is we can try and make things better in a moment when we, the people, actually understand the power that we have. And I know I've said this 800,000 million times, but our government was grounded on public opinion. It was the thing that the founders understood was different about the American Democratic Republic than a monarchy. The public is what really matters. Even people like Alexander Hamilton, who wasn't necessarily very happy with democracy, he was like, well, we got what we got, so I'm going to do what I have to do to appeal to the people. Okay, I get it. That's who we are. And we forget that at our peril. We've forgotten it for a little while, but Tuesday is a pretty big reminder.
Yeah, and I'm over here now thinking about Machiavelli and what he said about leadership, but that's probably a conversation for another day. I think that's right. I think I'm unsettled about where we are as a country, but I'm sort of gritting my teeth going forward, because I think it's going to be a rough ride. But it also feels historically appropriate, in addition to everything else, that the American people have spoken as loudly as they have and are organizing the way they are by themselves outside of all the corporate structures that have come to dominate our society. And I don't see that stopping.
No, and that's historically appropriate is wonderful. And when you step back and take that kind of perspective, what you see is that the vast majority of big changes in American society have been bottom up, have been started local, have been started with the people. So that's historically appropriate, and also a historical reminder of where we are and what we should think about what will happen going forward.
On that cheery note, enjoy your day. Are you off to the farmer's market?
I'm going to the farmer's market. So I mentioned once before Gary the Apple Guy. And then I went to the farmer's market and told Gary the Apple Guy that I had mentioned him on this. And it made him so happy. So I've mentioned it again, because I will now go back and tell him that in one way or another, people heard the phrase Gary the Apple Guy.
Is that literally the name of his stand?
No, but he is Gary and he sells apples.
Oh, well, that'll be easy to find in New York City, Joanne.
It's my little farmer's market. It's a little tiny farmer's market.
With Gary the Apple Guy. All right.
With Gary the Apple Guy. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's do this again next weekend, I think.
Good. I think so too.
All right. So I'll chat with you after this. Okay. And I guess thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Always happy to be here with you, Heather.
Yeah, I love you, Joanne.
I love you too, friend.
You know what? It'll be good when we can do this and we can have a down and dirty hot fight over the 1815 Hartford Convention, or 1814, or whenever the hell it was.
That would be great with cocktails in our hands.
No, well, not at 10 o'clock in the morning, but yes.
No. Yes. What are you talking about now? I guess I was thinking more broadly. Okay.
There you go.
With more coffee at our hand.
There you go. All right. Talk to you later, Joanne. Have a good day.